Trucker stopped by pulled over car, realizes it was a big mistake. Imagine this. The 18-wheeler's steady drone resonated within Jake, a somnolent rhythm he hadn't acknowledged missing. Hours dissolved, an unbroken ribbon of asphalt unspooling beneath the highway's amber wash. Beyond the cab, darkness reigned, punctuated by the rare glimmer of distant homesteads and the diamond dust indifference of stars. His gaze drifted to the snapshot secured to the dash. Martha, all gap-toothed grin and youthful exuberance, radiating a sunlight that predated Sarah's departure. He traced the photo's time-worn edge, a silent vow reverberating in the cramped space. He wouldn't fail her. Her birthday loomed, a fixed point on his horizon. He had to be there. The gravity of that promise settled, a familiar, unwelcome passenger. For 5 years, he'd navigated the roles of both parents, a daunting undertaking he approached with a fierce, ursine protectiveness. Sarah's vanishing act had carved a void into their existence, a persistent reminder of irretrievable loss. He banished the ache, his focus returning to the blacktop river flowing before him, the route that would, eventually, carry him back to his daughter. He adjusted the rear view, confronting his own image. The lines framing his eyes were deeper now, roadmaps etched by sleepless nights and relentless pressure. His beard, more salt than pepper, starkly contrasted the youthful innocence captured in Martha's photograph. He was aging undeniably, but his journey was far from complete. Static crackled, preceding the gravelly timbre of Hank, the hammer miller. "Big rig, you out there in the ether? Thought I caught your blinker a few back." Jake pressed the CB transmit button. "Hammer, good to connect. Just grinding out the miles. Miles are the only thing we conjure out here, ain't that the gospel?" Hank rumbled, his voice like rocks cascading down a slope. "This stretch of blacktop is a desolate creature tonight. Preaching to the choir," Jake confirmed, his gaze sweeping the barren expanse. "Feels like I'm the only breathing soul within 100. Well, you ain't alone, Big Rig. Keep that thought close. I'm riding your 6, spiritually speaking. Besides," Hank added, his tone sobering, "loneliness is a trucker's shadow. Make peace with it, or it'll swallow you whole." Jake acknowledged the truth in Hank's words. The highway's isolation was a double-edged blade. It granted sanctuary, a retreat from the world's clamor, but it also tormented, a constant whisper of what remained beyond reach. "Family holding up, Hammer?" Jake inquired, diverting the conversation. "The missus is breathing down my neck about retirement. Claims I've seen enough asphalt to surface a small nation. Kids are squared away, grandkids are a blessing. You comprehend the dynamic." Jake smiled, imagining Hank amidst his lively brood. It mirrored the life he envisioned for Martha, brimming with affection and joy, a world shielded from the hard realities of the open road. "You headed home any time soon?" Hank pressed. "Pushing hard to make Martha's birthday," Jake responded, his voice laced with tenderness. "Wouldn't forfeit it for all the tea in China. That's the crux of it, Big Rig. Kinship. That's the linchpin at the end of the day." They exchanged pleasantries for a spell, trading updates on road hazards and the latest industry buzz. Finally, with a fond farewell, Hank signed off, leaving Jake once again with his ruminations and the engine's unwavering thrum. He eyed the fuel gauge, then the road ahead. He could likely reach the next fuel stop without pause, yet the craving for a steaming cup of coffee beckoned. He struck a bargain, opting to press on for another hour before yielding. He passed the weather-beaten placard, barely illuminated. It declared, "Nowhere, NM, 78 miles. 78 miles to nowhere." That about encapsulated it, he mused darkly. This entire existence sometimes felt like an arduous trek to nowhere in particular. Just as he steeled himself for another hour of monotonous navigation, twin beams pierced the darkness, growing brighter with each passing second. As the vehicle approached, Jake recognized a dilapidated sedan, parked precariously on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking feebly. He wavered. Fatigue gnawed at him, his schedule was already strained, and the entanglement in another's misfortune was the last thing he needed. Yet the car's precarious position, the almost frantic pulse of the emergency lights, pricked his conscience. He recalled Sarah, marooned years ago with a punctured tire, and the goodwill of the stranger who offered assistance. That simple act of kindness had resonated through the years. He exhaled, his internal conflict resolved. He simply couldn't bypass them. He signaled, cautiously guiding his rig onto the shoulder, maintaining a safe buffer behind the stranded vehicle. He silenced the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the cricket's serenade and the distant yowl of a coyote. He retrieved his flashlight and descended from the cab, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. Approaching the sedan, he observed a figure slumped over the wheel. "Everything all right?" he called out, his voice carrying above the whoosh of passing vehicles. The figure stirred, slowly righting itself. A young woman emerged, her face wan and etched with worry in the dim illumination. "Thank heavens," she exhaled, her voice trembling slightly. "I feared I was stranded for the duration. What seems to be the snag?" Jake inquired, his eyes taking in the surroundings. Something about the scene felt amiss. "Flat tire," she explained, gesturing towards the car's rear. "I lack a spare, and the technical skills to install it regardless." Jake circled to the rear of the vehicle, inspecting the damaged tire. It was indeed ruptured beyond simple repair. He registered that the trunk was slightly ajar. "Not to worry," he reassured, attempting to project calm. "I carry a spare in the rig. I'll have you back underway shortly." He pivoted to return to his truck, but a flicker of movement in the car's shadow arrested him. A form materialized, a man, lean and sinewy, his features swallowed by the darkness. Something in his grasp caught the moonlight, a glint of menace. A frigid wave of dread washed through Jake. This wasn't merely a flat tire. This was a calculated trap. "Freeze, old-timer," the man ordered, his voice sharp and devoid of warmth. Jake locked in place, his hand instinctively reaching for the tire iron stashed behind his seat. He recognized the danger. He was isolated, on a desolate stretch of highway, confronting two unknown assailants. But he wouldn't capitulate without resistance. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice controlled despite the fear gnawing within. "Just your cash," the man sneered, advancing. "And your rig. Neither is yours for the taking." Jake growled, his grip tightening on the tire iron. The man lunged, the object in his hand resolving into a gleaming blade. Jake reacted on instinct, swinging the tire iron with every fiber of his being. The impact landed squarely on the man's arm, a sickening thud resonating through the night air. The man shrieked, dropping the knife and cradling his wounded limb. The woman, hitherto a silent observer, surged into action. She snatched the knife and lunged at Jake, her eyes blazing with desperate fury. Jake dodged her clumsy swipe, disarming her with a deft blow from the tire iron. He had no desire to injure her, but he couldn't allow her to hinder him. He spun and sprinted toward his truck, adrenaline surging through his system. He had to escape. He had to put distance between them. He scrambled into the cab, slamming the door and fumbling for the ignition. The engine roared, the sudden cacophony shattering the silence of the night. He engaged the gears and roared away, leaving the figures behind, silhouetted against the fading glow of his taillights. He didn't dare glance back. He knew they would be in pursuit. He grabbed his CB radio. "Dispatch, this is Big Rig. I'm requesting assistance. I'm on Highway 66, approximately 70 miles west of nowhere. I've been assaulted. I need police support." He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white. The long haul home had morphed into a desperate struggle for survival. His breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurred at the edges. A glance in the rearview revealed headlights rapidly closing the distance. They were coming. He tightened his hold on the wheel. No one would impede his return to Martha. Distress signal. The fuel gauge needle mocked his dwindling options, a stark reminder that freedom had a cost. The highway unspooled before him, a black ribbon beneath a bruised and fading sky. The adrenaline's initial surge receded, leaving behind a prickling unease. His grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles bone white. A vision of Martha, her face alight with birthday joy, flickered in his mind. He had to get back to her. Absolutely had to. Then, looming up ahead, he registered them. A quarter-mile distant, emergency flashers blinked a hypnotic warning against the deepening gloom. A dark sedan huddled on the meager shoulder, partially swallowed by a grove of gaunt, leafless trees. Beside the vehicle, a woman gestured wildly, her form a dark slash against the last embers of sunset. Instinctively, Jake's foot eased pressure on the accelerator. The memory of Sarah, helpless and alone, played out in his head, an unwelcome echo. It was the reason he'd helped Sarah, wasn't it? A quick glance at his rearview mirror revealed nothing pursuing. Yet, a shiver crawled across the back of his neck, an instinctive alarm. A battle raged within him. Every fiber urged him to keep driving, to widen the gap between himself and the danger he'd just escaped. But the woman projected an image of raw desperation, an undeniable vulnerability. He recalled the vow he'd made after Sarah's disappearance, to never turn a blind eye to those in need. He eased the Peterbilt down to a crawl, eyes glued to the figure beside the stalled car. She was willowy and tall, wind-blown strands of hair lashing her face. Her gestures were almost convulsive, a silent plea that resonated deep within him. The flashing lights ahead pulsed with increasing urgency, like a beacon cutting through the desolate landscape. The silence, punctuated only by the low growl of his engine, pressed down on him. No other vehicles graced the road. No houses dotted the distant horizon. Only the endless scrubland and the woman, bathed in the insistent amber glow. He steered the big rig onto the shoulder, maintaining a cautious distance from the sedan. The air brakes exhaled a long, drawn-out sigh, amplifying the sense of isolation. He killed the engine, plunging the cab into a muted quiet. The headlights remained blazing, illuminating the tableau. He reached for the CB radio, his fingers hovering over the transmit button. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Rig," he announced, his voice tight with apprehension. "Anyone out there receive?" Only static answered his call. He repeated the message, louder this time, infusing it with urgency. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Rig. I've got a possible stranded motorist on Highway 16, approximately 10 miles east of Harmony Creek. Anyone copy?" Silence remained his only respondent, a suffocating blanket. He let the microphone slip from his grasp, a knot of anxiety twisting in his gut. He scrutinized the woman through the windshield. She had ceased her frantic waving. Now she simply stood there, her shoulders slumped in defeat, her head lowered. Even from this remove, he could sense the depths of her dejection. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. He recognized the inherent risk. He knew he shouldn't get involved. But the thought of leaving her lingered, a haunting specter. He'd spent too many years wrestling with the what-ifs, and the could-have-beens. He refused to add another to the tally. He retrieved his tire iron, testing its reassuring weight in his hand. It offered scant protection, but it was better than nothing. He inhaled deeply, steeling himself for the encounter, and pushed open the door. The frigid night air assaulted him. He descended from the cab, the crunch of gravel under his boots loud in the hush. He kept the tire iron concealed at his side, hidden from plain sight. As he approached the sedan, he swept the surrounding area with his gaze, every sense heightened. The shadows seemed to coalesce and deepen, the trees looming taller, their branches like gnarled, skeletal arms. Only the whisper of the wind and the rhythmic pulse of the hazard lights broke the oppressive stillness. He halted a few paces from the woman. Closer, her distress was magnified. Her complexion was pallid, her eyes ringed with red. He noticed the fine tailoring of her clothes, the delicate silver bracelet adorning her wrist. She seemed jarringly out of place in this desolate setting. "Everything all right?" he inquired, his voice gruff, but carrying a note of genuine concern. The woman looked up, surprise momentarily erasing the worry from her face. She inhaled a ragged breath and managed a weak imitation of a smile. "Oh, thank Providence," she responded, her voice trembling with relief. I feared I would be stranded here through the entire night." "What's the trouble?" Jake asked, his gaze still darting about. I'm uncertain," she stammered, her voice catching in her throat. The car simply died. I attempted to restart it, but nothing happens. She gestured helplessly towards the sedan. I know absolutely nothing about cars. Jake advanced further, peering under the car's hood. The sharp tang of burnt rubber assaulted his nostrils. He released the latch and raised the hood. A plume of acrid smoke billowed out, stinging his eyes. Looks like you have a ruptured hose, he observed, pointing to a burst coolant line. It's going to need a tow. The woman's spirits plummeted. Oh no, she moaned in despair. I have no funds for a tow. And there's no cell service out here. Jake hesitated. He truly shouldn't become involved. Yet he couldn't bring himself to abandon her. Listen, he proposed. I'm driving into Harmony Creek. I can offer you a ride. You can arrange for a tow truck from there. The woman's eyes brightened with hope. Oh, would you? That would be exceptionally kind of you. Thank you profusely. Jake nodded, his instincts still sounding alarms. But he suppressed the feeling. He was a trucker. Helping those in need was what he did. Simply give me a moment to retrieve my bag, the woman said, moving towards the car. As she reached for the door, Jake discerned something reflecting the light in the shadows behind the sedan. A glint, too sharp, too unnatural. He strained his eyes, attempting to decipher its form. Then he was there. A figure materialized from behind the car, silhouetted by the darkness. He possessed a powerful build, broad shoulders, his features obscured by a baseball cap. He clutched something long and metallic in his hand. Jake's blood turned to ice. A crowbar. He spun around, his hand instinctively seeking the tire iron. But he was far too late. The woman, Seraphina, had rotated back towards him, a malevolent grin twisting her features. All traces of vulnerability had vanished, replaced by a glacial, calculating stare. My apologies, old-timer, she said, her voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. But you're on the cusp of experiencing one terrible night. And then, the man with the crowbar charged. A helping hand? The sunset was a gash of crimson across the horizon, igniting the arid landscape. Jake feathered the throttle, the air brake sighing as the big rig lumbered to a halt. A clunker sat slumped on the verge ahead, hazard lights blinking a frantic plea against the encroaching dusk. A lone silhouette, slight and hesitant, waved. Crap. He was burning daylight, each mile crucial, yet conscience pricked at him. He knew the gnawing desperation of being stranded, vulnerable, at the road's callous whim. Besides Lily would insist he offer aid. He parked a safe distance back, the 18-wheeler looming over the smaller car. Killing the engine, he registered the quiet hum of crickets and the distant growl of westbound traffic. Something felt amiss. He grabbed his mag light from the cab and hopped down, boots crunching on the loose gravel. As he approached the sedan, he surveyed the surroundings, senses heightened. Nothing screamed danger, just the vast, desolate Texas plains sprawling in both directions. But the feeling lingered, a subtle alarm tingling at his nape. The woman stood by the driver's side rear, her face wan in the dying light. Younger than he'd guessed, maybe early 20s, with a spill of dark hair framing her features. Denim jacket, simple tee, jeans, the very picture of helpless vulnerability. Thank heavens, she breathed, her voice a shaky thread. I've been stuck for almost an hour. I'm hopeless with cars. She indicated the collapsed tire with a helpless gesture. It just went. Jake paused several feet away, letting the flashlight's beam rake across the rubber. Flat, no doubt, the sidewall ripped to shreds. He knelt, his calloused hand tracing the damage. It looked deliberately sabotaged. A knot tightened in his stomach. Got a spare? He inquired, keeping his tone even. Yes, in the trunk. But, well, I wrestled with it, but the jack. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. She wrung her hands, her eyes wide, imploring. Honestly, cars and me? We don't mix. He stood, studying her. Seemingly distressed, yet something flickered in her gaze, an element he couldn't quite decipher, that gave him pause. Too perfect. All right, he conceded slowly. I'll have a look. But I gotta say, That tire looks more than just a blowout. Her brow furrowed in what appeared to be confusion. What do you mean? Doesn't matter. Just stand clear. He glanced back toward his rig. Spare and Jack are in the toolbox on the driver's side. He filed away the car's make and model in his memory. He'd check the plates later, if he had the chance. He strode back to his truck, the weight of his suspicion pressing down. He unlocked the toolbox, his fingers finding the familiar heft of the lug wrench. He seized the hydraulic jack, his mind churning. Why hadn't she contacted roadside assistance? Even without coverage, most companies would respond for a fee. And why the insistence on his help? The whole scenario reeked of contrivance. Turning back, he noticed her glance furtively toward the scrub brush lining the road. He followed her line of sight, but saw nothing. Only shadows and the rustle of unseen life. He drew a deep breath, attempting to quell his accelerating pulse. He was letting his guard down. He was a trucker, a good citizen. He wouldn't let some nagging doubt prevent him from assisting someone in need. He returned to the sedan, the tools substantial in his grip. He set them down beside the ruined tire. Okay, he said, forcing a reassuring smile. Let's see what we've got. He knelt once more, examining the jack points on the sedan. He ran a hand along the frame, searching for any sign of damage or manipulation. As he did, he caught a faint whiff of something metallic, sharp, acrid. Gun oil. His head snapped up, senses on alert. The woman had vanished. He spun around, eyes darting across the darkness. He spotted her then, emerging from the scrub, a pistol gripped in her hand. Behind her, a figure solidified, tall and cadaverous, his features obscured by shadow. He brandished a crowbar. Don't move, the woman commanded, her voice now devoid of warmth, the feigned helplessness gone. The tremor had vanished, supplanted by cold resolve. Wallet, keys. Now. Nobody gets hurt. Jake stared, a chill spreading through his veins. He had been right. It was a scheme. A meticulously crafted deception. Are you kidding me? He muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. Rage, a dark and familiar guest, began to simmer. He pictured Lily expecting him. He recalled the promise he'd made. He wasn't going to let these buzzards, bring him down. I said, hand them over. The woman raised the pistol, her hand trembling slightly, the only crack in her composure. Jake remained still. He assessed the woman, then the figure with the crowbar, calculating his odds. He was bigger, stronger, but they possessed the element of surprise. And a firearm. You picked the wrong damn trucker, he growled, menace in his voice. He reached down, his hand closing around the lug wrench. The woman's eyes widened, registering the threat. Don't be stupid, she said, her voice now tinged with desperation. We don't want any trouble. Really? Jake spat. Because you sure as hell brought it. He swung the lug wrench. Ambush. The wrench fought him, slipping against the stubborn lug nut. A hollow clang echoed, amplifying the sudden quiet. He swiped at the sweat beading on his forehead, the air, previously redolent with pine and sun-baked asphalt, now thrumming with unspoken menace. Just one more nut, he'd been so close. Then they materialized. From the shadowed embrace of the roadside thicket, two figures emerged, silhouettes against the waning light. The taller one cradled a sawn-off shotgun with unsettling ease. His companion, squat and thickset, brandished a pistol, its surface reflecting the fading sun in a predatory glint. Bandanas masked their faces, leaving only eyes, cold, calculating, visible. Jake's blood ran cold, the wrench a dead weight in his grasp. His gaze flickered to Sarah. The transformation was chilling. Gone were the wide, imploring eyes. In their place, a flinty, almost cruel awareness. The quivering lip had hardened into a taut, unforgiving line. Well now, ain't this a helpful soul? The taller man drawled, his voice a rasp of gravel and amusement. He edged closer, the shotgun unwavering. Swallowed the whole damn story. A knot formed in Jake's stomach. The artless vulnerability, it had been a complete fabrication. A wave of anger, sharp and primal, washed over him, laced with the bitter taste of betrayal. He'd been taken for a fool. Now, the coppery tang of dread coated his tongue. "Sarah?" he managed, his voice a fractured whisper. He needed an explanation, a denial, something to grasp. Her gaze met his, utterly devoid of remorse. "Sorry, trucker," she clipped, her voice as flat and lifeless as a dial tone. "Needed a lift. Needed your cash more." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped the taller man. "Cash? Honey, we need more than chump change. We need the whole damn rig." Jake's eyes widened, comprehension dawning like a hammer blow. The rig? They wanted his truck? His lifeline? That was a boundary he wouldn't allow them to cross. "You're making a mistake," he growled, his grip tightening involuntarily. "You don't want this." The shorter one snorted, a guttural sound. "Oh, we do. More than you know. Drop the wrench and assume the position. Face down. Slow." He punctuated his words with a nervous twitch of the pistol. This one was a tightly coiled spring, ready to unspool. Jake assessed them quickly. The tall one projected an air of control, but the short one, he was pure volatile energy. A tremor, a misstep, and the gun would go off. He deliberately set the wrench on the ground, the metallic rasp cutting through the charged air. He knelt, interlacing his fingers behind his head. He wasn't playing the hero today. Not against armed predators. But he wouldn't surrender without a fight either. "Good call," the tall one sneered, his voice dripping with false praise. "Now, Sarah, liberate him of his valuables." Sarah moved forward, her gaze unwavering. He caught a whiff of her perfume, a cloying sweetness that now felt like a violation of his personal space. Her fingers brushed against his skin as she probed his back pocket. He gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to recoil. She retrieved his wallet, flipping it open with practiced ease. A flicker of surprise registered in her eyes as she tallied the bills. More than she'd anticipated, no doubt. "Not bad," she commented, her voice regaining a touch of its earlier faux sweetness, which now tasted like arsenic. "For a blue-collar stiff." The shorter man fidgeted. "Hurry it up, Sarah. Let's get rolling." She nodded, tucking the wallet into her pocket. All right. Just gotta snag the keys." Her fingers closed around the keyring at his belt. Jake tensed. The keys to his rig, that was the breaking point. He wouldn't let them take his truck. It was more than just a vehicle. It was his sanctuary, his livelihood, his freedom. The moment her fingers tightened around the keys, Jake unleashed his pent-up fury. He twisted away, the short man's frantic shot ripping through the air beside him. A puff of dust erupted from the shoulder of the road. He scrambled upright, reaching for the discarded lug wrench. "What the hell?" the short one shrieked, his voice cracking with alarm. He flailed with the pistol, struggling to reacquire his target. Jake ducked beneath the arc, slamming the lug wrench down on the man's wrist. A sharp snap resonated in the tense air, and the pistol clattered uselessly to the ground. A strangled cry tore from the man's throat as he cradled his injured arm. The tall one reacted instantly, bringing the shotgun to bear. Jake didn't wait for him to level it. He bolted toward the cab of his rig, adrenaline surging through his limbs. He had to get inside, behind the wheel, away from this nightmare. The shotgun roared behind him, followed by the sickening zip of pellets tearing through the air. A searing pain bloomed across his back, but he pressed on. He reached the door, yanked it open, and threw himself inside. He fumbled for the ignition, his hands slick with sweat. The engine sprang to life with a reassuring rumble, bathing the cab in a familiar vibration. He jammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The rig leaped forward, tires churning gravel. He caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. The tall one stood planted in the road, leveling the shotgun. Beside him, Sarah's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The short one writhed on the ground, clutching his mangled wrist. Jake didn't hesitate. He wrenched the wheel, steering the truck directly toward the figures blocking his escape. He wasn't aiming to kill, but he wouldn't be denied his freedom. They scattered like startled birds, diving for the roadside ditch as the behemoth bore down on them. Jake roared past, leaving them choking in a plume of dust and diesel fumes. He couldn't afford to look back. He needed to escape. To alert the authorities. To process the madness that had just unfolded. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles shone white. The burn in his back intensified, but he disregarded it. He was alive. He was mobile. And he would exact retribution for their treachery, for the trust they had shattered. He glanced at the speedometer, then pressed down harder on the gas pedal. Fight or flight. The sharp bite of gunpowder filled Jake's lungs, mingling with the coppery reek of his own spilled blood. A hand pressed against the throbbing wound between his shoulders, a searing brand against his raw nerves. The semi bucked beneath him, tires crunching on loose stone as he fought the wheel, struggling to hold his course on the frail asphalt thread. "All right, old-timer," a voice grated, dripping with menace. "Take it easy. Just ease her over to the shoulder." A fleeting glance in the rearview revealed two masked figures crammed into the sleeper. Marcus, he figured, was the speaker. Beside him, Sarah, damn her soul, sat rigid, her face a ghostly mask reflecting the dashboard's glow like shattered ice. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Sarah pleaded, her voice a tightrope of fear. "Just give them what they want." What they wanted. Bile burned in his throat. His savings, his livelihood, maybe his life. All for what? A ticket out of nowhere for Sarah? Another night of oblivion for Marcus? "I said pull over," Marcus bellowed, puncturing the command with a brutal shove of the weapon against Jake's head. The gun's cold edge scraped his temple. He gripped the wheel until his knuckles shone like bone. A tremor ran through his legs, fueled by the surge of adrenaline that demanded he act. Flee or confront? The question, in truth, had resolved itself the instant he felt the steel. Escape was an illusion. This rig had become a steel trap. He slammed his foot to the floor, the brakes screaming as the truck lurched to a halt, throwing Sarah and Marcus forward. A cloud of dust engulfed the cab, a momentary shroud of grit and shadow. "What in hell are you doing?" Marcus cursed, regaining his footing. He brandished the pistol like a child's toy. "Trying to get us all killed?" Jake tuned him out, senses sharpened to a razor's edge, mind a whirlwind of calculation. He couldn't muscle past them both. Not with a bullet lodged near his spine. But he could unbalance the equation. He could ignite the fuse. "The cash is in the glove box," he said, his voice feigning calm. "Just take it. Just don't hurt me." He needed them to see a broken man, resigned to his fate. Sarah's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Remorse? Guilt? No time to decipher it. Marcus, ever the dullard, swallowed the bait whole. "That's the talk. Now pop it open." Jake reached for the glove compartment, movements measured and slow. Marcus eased back on the pistol's grip, greedy for the prize. This was the moment. In a sudden, explosive surge of motion, honed from years of military drills, Jake's hand slammed down on Marcus' wrist, pinning it against the plastic. The console groaned under the pressure. Marcus yelped, fingers locking in a painful spasm. "You son of a bitch!" The pistol bounced across the floor. Jake allowed no reprieve. He twisted Marcus' wrists, forcing him down. The larger man's weight shifted, momentarily unseating Sarah. "Get him off me!" Marcus shrieked, his face twisted in a rictus of pain and fury. Sarah hesitated, her gaze flitting between Jake and Marcus. She looked caught, cornered, a rabbit in the headlights. The window was narrow, but he had to seize it. He kneed Marcus in the stomach, doubling him over. Air rushed from his lungs in a strangled wheeze. Jake used the momentum to wrench the man's arm high behind his back, dragging him up, using him as a shield. "Back off!" Jake roared, his voice raw with adrenaline's rasp. He pressed the muzzle of Marcus' own gun against his temple. "One twitch, and I paint the windshield with his brains." Sarah's eyes widened, stark with horror. "Jake, don't. You don't need to do this." "Don't I?" He spat, gaze unwavering. The betrayal still stung, a festering wound. Think I asked for this? Think I enjoy holding a gun to someone's head? He saw the fear bloom in her eyes, the slow dawn of understanding of the stakes. But beneath the terror, something else flickered. A shard of regret? A desperate plea for absolution? He clamped down on it. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not now. Get out, he growled, tightening his grip on Marcus. Both of you. Get out of my truck. Get out of my life. Sarah retreated cautiously, deliberately. She opened the passenger door and stepped onto the dirt. Marcus, still gasping for air, scrambled to his feet, eyes burning with resentment. You'll pay for this, old man, he snarled, cradling his throbbing wrist. You just made a grave mistake. Jake didn't respond. He kept the gun pressed firmly against Marcus' head, finger hovering over the trigger. The urge to pull it was overwhelming. To silence the threat, to erase the betrayal, to retrieve the stolen piece. But he resisted. He lowered the gun, shoving Marcus away. The man stumbled, landing hard on the uneven ground. Get out, Jake repeated, voice barely audible. Before I reconsider. Marcus scrambled to his feet and wordlessly limped toward Sarah. For a moment they stood together, silhouetted against the dying sun, dwarfed by the vastness of the desert. Then they vanished into the encroaching gloom. Jake watched them go, chest heaving, body shaking with a mix of fatigue and residual fear. He leaned against the steering wheel, the ache in his back a constant, pulsing reminder. He had prevailed in this skirmish. He had survived. Yet, the victory rang hollow, stained by the knowledge of how close he'd come to crossing a threshold, to becoming the monster he abhorred. He closed his eyes, conjuring Lily's face. Her radiant smile, her unyielding belief in him. He couldn't let them steal that. He wouldn't allow them to corrupt him. He drew a deep breath, bracing himself. The road ahead stretched long and perilous. He was injured, double-crossed, and solitary. But he was living. And he still had a daughter to safeguard. He fired the engine, the rumble filling the cabin. He slammed it into gear and steered back onto the highway, abandoning the dust and darkness behind. His journey had just grown infinitely more treacherous. Explosive turn. The reek of gasoline and raw desperation clawed at the air. Having shaken off the initial daze, Marcus unleashed a bellow that resonated deep in Jake's marrow. He charged, a lumbering brute propelled by fury and cheap whiskey. Jake, still favoring his injured shoulder, danced aside, the movement sending shards of pain through him. Curse you, old coot! Marcus roared, flailing. A fist slammed into Jake's ribs, a sickening crunch that emptied his lungs. Jake gasped, pain blossoming across his flank, and countered with a sharp kick to Marcus's kneecap. The big man yelped, clutching his leg, granting Jake a crucial reprieve to steady himself. Sarah, her expression a battlefield of fear, panic, and a faint glimmer of what might have been remorse, lunged for the discarded pistol. Stop it! Please, just stop! She shrieked, her voice swallowed by the brawl. She snatched the weapon, her trembling hands nearly fumbling it away. Sarah, blast him! Marcus howled, his face twisted in agony. Shoot the old bastard! Jake ignored Marcus, locking eyes with Sarah. He witnessed the inner turmoil etched on her face, the conflict between self-preservation and whatever shreds of conscience remained. Don't, Sarah, he urged, his tone low and unwavering, attempting to pierce the pandemonium. This isn't you. She aimed the gun, her finger quivering on the trigger. Tears carved paths down her cheeks, blurring the scene. I have to, she choked out. I need the money. We need it. Jake saw the dread in her eyes, the desperation that had driven her to this precipice. She wasn't inherently malicious, merely adrift. There are other options, Sarah, he implored, inching towards her with deliberate slowness. Don't forfeit everything for this. Sensing an advantage, Marcus threw himself at Jake's back, unbalancing him. Jake staggered, the world tilting precariously. Sarah shrieked as the gun slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering across the asphalt. It settled near Marcus's outstretched hand. Yes! Marcus roared triumphantly, seizing the weapon. He aimed it at Jake, his eyes burning with venom. "This is the end, old man. Time to meet your maker." Jake braced himself, understanding he was cornered. For a heartbeat, he closed his eyes, an image of his daughter flickering in his mind. He silently pledged to keep fighting, to locate her, at all costs. Suddenly, Sarah's scream ripped through the night, a desperate, keening wail. "No, Marcus! Don't!" She hurled herself at him, attempting to wrench the gun away. They wrestled, a frenzied tangle of limbs and desperation. The gun bucked wildly in Marcus's grip. A shot exploded, deafening in the confined space. But the bullet wasn't meant for Jake. The projectile, a stray, a consequence of their frantic struggle, punctured the fuel tank of Sarah's dilapidated sedan. For a suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, a low growl, a guttural tremor that vibrated through the very ground. The air warped, distorting the already surreal scene. Jake felt a searing wave of heat, an unseen hand shoving him back. Instinctively, he shielded his face, bracing for the inevitable cataclysm. The explosion erupted instantaneously, a blinding flare and a thunderous roar that annihilated the night. The force slammed into Jake, flinging him backwards like a discarded doll. He crashed down, his head striking the asphalt with a sickening crack. The world dissolved into a churning vortex of fire and smoke. The air choked with the acrid tang of burning gasoline and molten metal. Screams, indistinct and primal, echoed in his ears. Jake dragged himself upright, his body a symphony of pain. His head throbbed, his vision swam. He could barely penetrate the thick smoke, but he could feel the searing heat radiating from the inferno that had consumed Sarah's car. He stumbled back, away from the pyre, his mind reeling. What had just transpired? Had Sarah and Marcus? He couldn't bear to contemplate it. The image of the incinerated vehicle, the sheer devastating power of the explosion, was branded into his memory. He had to escape. Ignoring the searing agony in his shoulder and the pounding in his head, Jake lurched towards his truck. He fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He jammed the key into the ignition, the engine sputtering to life. He slammed the truck into gear and shot away, leaving a plume of dust and smoke in his wake. He didn't glance back. He couldn't. As he drove, the wail of sirens intensified, growing closer with each passing second. He checked his rearview mirror, witnessing the flashing lights of police vehicles converging on the scene. He knew he should stop, offer an explanation. But he was incapable. He had to keep moving. He had to reach his daughter. Guilt gnawed at him, a relentless, icy ache in his chest. He had abandoned them there, amidst the conflagration and the chaos. Had he made the right choice? Or had he doomed them to a fiery grave? He didn't know. All that mattered was that he had to continue. He had a commitment to fulfill. He floored the accelerator, the engine roaring its defiance. The truck surged forward, devouring the miles. He was fleeing the epicenter of the explosion, fleeing his conscience, fleeing toward his daughter. The police sirens shrieked louder, closer. He knew it was only a matter of time before they intercepted him. But he wouldn't yield. He couldn't. He was a trucker, a father, a survivor. And he would resort to any measure to reach his destination. The path ahead stretched long and uncertain, but he was prepared. He had stared into the face of death, endured betrayal, and now, the harrowing consequences of a desperate act. He was bruised, wounded, but unbroken. The pursuit was on. Escape. The world returned in jagged shards of noise and distorted vision. Copper tang flooded Jake's mouth, his cheek burned with phantom fire. The air shimmered, still charged from the blast that had transformed Sarah's car into a blazing sarcophagus, its grotesque silhouette clawing at the sky. A glacial dread gripped him, stealing his breath. He crab-walked backwards, escaping the inferno's reach, asphalt grinding into his palms. A jackhammer pounded behind his eyes, each throb a wave of sickening dizziness. Escape was paramount. Now. Marcus roared, a primal sound swallowed by the cacophony. He glimpsed him, stark against the conflagration, manhandling Sarah toward their escape vehicle, a nondescript sedan he'd previously dismissed. She stumbled, her expression a canvas of disbelief. The licking flames painted her features demonic, exaggerating the sheer terror etched there. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat. He saw not malice, but a stark, vulnerable fear mirroring his own panic. Something else flickered there too, a ghost of remorse? It vanished before he could decipher it. Marcus shoved her inside, the car door slamming with a dull thud. The engine coughed, sputtered, then detonated into life. Gravel sprayed as the sedan surged forward, tires howling as it swerved onto the road, fleeing in the opposite direction from Big Rig. They were gone, swallowed by the night. Adrenaline surged, briefly eclipsing the lingering pain. Jake hauled himself upright, stumbling towards his truck. Big Rig was miraculously unscathed, save for a missing passenger side mirror, likely a casualty of flying debris. He wrenched open the driver's door, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in his shoulder. His fingers, clumsy and unresponsive, wrestled with the keys. The ignition groaned in protest, then the engine caught, a familiar rumble offering a small counterpoint to the surrounding pandemonium. He slammed the truck into gear, the action purely instinctual. Sirens howled in the distance, their approach growing with menacing speed. There was no time for analysis, no room to dwell on the betrayal. He had to move. He granted one last, involuntary glance at the smoldering wreckage. Sarah. Her face haunted him, the brief glimpse of humanity disrupting his assumptions. Was she truly complicit, or just another puppet dancing on invisible strings? The question burrowed into his mind, a seed of doubt taking root in already exhausted soil. But doubt was a luxury he could ill afford. His daughter awaited him. And no one, nothing, would obstruct his path. Jake stomped on the accelerator, the tires finding purchase on the asphalt. Big Rig bellowed, its engine a defiant roar against the approaching wail of sirens. He swung the truck onto the highway, dismissing the flashing lights consuming his rearview mirror. The law was hunting him. He knew it, accepted it. But surrender wasn't an option. Not until he held his daughter safe. The chase had begun. A quick check of the rearview revealed two cruisers closing the gap, their oscillating lights strobing the night in alternating hues of blue and red. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles bleaching white. He needed a strategy, and he needed it immediately. A straight line escape was impossible. Big Rig possessed power, but lacked finesse. He had to exploit its mass, his familiarity with these roads. His gaze swept the landscape, flicking between the asphalt ribbon ahead and the surrounding terrain. To his right, a rutted dirt track veered off into the impenetrable darkness of the countryside. The route was hazardous. Unpaved, uneven, likely a minefield of potholes. But it represented his only hope. He wrestled the steering wheel, the truck shuddering violently as it abandoned the highway for the treacherous track. The suspension groaned in agony as it absorbed the brutal impact of the rough terrain. Jake fought to keep the vehicle under control, his body jarring with each jolt and rut. The police vehicles followed, their headlights bucking wildly as they navigated the uneven surface. He heard their engines laboring, their tires spitting a constant barrage of gravel. He urged Big Rig onward, the engine screaming in protest. The truck fishtailed, threatening to spin into oblivion. He battled the steering wheel, his muscles straining. He had to vanish from their sight. Quickly. Ahead, he detected a sudden bend in the road, concealed by a dense thicket of trees. A blind corner, ripe with opportunity to break their pursuit. He slammed on the brakes, tires locking and unleashing a plume of dust into the air. He cranked the wheel, throwing the truck into a controlled skid. Big Rig danced around the corner, tires lamenting in shrill agony. As he straightened, he extinguished the headlights, immersing the truck in absolute darkness. He stilled his breath, straining to capture the sound of the pursuing vehicles. Seconds stretched into an age. He detected the distant whine of their engines, growing steadily closer. Then, absolute silence. He lingered, his heart drumming against his ribs. Had they been fooled? Had he managed to sever the connection? Suddenly, headlights erupted behind him, flooding the road with a blinding glare. They hadn't been deceived. A curse escaped his lips. He was running out of maneuvers. He hammered the accelerator, the engine roaring back to life. The truck lunged forward, ripping through the darkness. The chase resumed. A glance in the rearview revealed the cruisers glued to his tail, their headlights boring into him like relentless eyes. He saw the flashing lights refracted in the swirling dust cloud. He had to improvise, to generate some breathing room. Ahead, he spotted a narrow bridge straddling a deep chasm. A ramshackle construction of decaying wood and rusting steel, seemingly incapable of carrying the weight of a family sedan, let alone a semi-truck. A pure gamble, a desperate, final measure. But he had no other path. He aimed Big Rig toward the center of the bridge, his hands fused to the steering wheel, knuckles throbbing. He felt the visceral pulse of the truck shuddering beneath him, the straining of the engine, the sheer, brute force of the machine. He steeled himself, accepting that this could mark the end. As he neared the bridge, he observed the lead cruiser gaining ground, its headlights engulfing his rearview mirror. He heard the screech of its tires as the driver fought to decelerate. Too late now. Jake hit the bridge at full bore, the impact radiating a shudder through the entire vehicle. The wooden planks moaned and groaned under the immense tonnage. He sensed the bridge swaying precariously, threatening to disintegrate beneath him. He glanced in the rearview and screamed. The police cruisers were right on his tail, the lead car inches from his bumper. Suddenly, the inevitable unfolded. The pursuing vehicle slammed into the trailer, as it veered off course on the bridge starting to lose its infrastructure integrity. The bridge then began to collapse, sending the trailer and cruisers down the ravine, as he made it to the other side of the bridge safely. The sound of the explosion was deafening, as he had just narrowly escaped a deadly fate. Calling for backup. The Big Rig bucked and swayed as Jake fought the wheel, wrestling the crippled behemoth away from the precipice. A glance in the rearview showed a roiling cloud of dust, obscuring the wreckage of the patrol cars. Solitude pressed in, this time a suffocating blanket woven with the threads of betrayal and loss. He seized the CB, the slick plastic a chilling contrast to the inferno building inside him. Breaker, this is Big Rig, come in anybody?" His voice rasped, a frayed edge to his control. He jabbed the transmit button again, his thumb bone white. "Breaker, someone. I'm calling for help. I need the police, damn it!" Static hissed, then a woman's voice, crisp and collected, sliced through the interference. "Big Rig, dispatch here. We read you. Provide your location and describe the emergency." Jake swallowed hard, striving for composure. The vision of Sarah's vehicle consumed by flames seared his eyelids. He banished it, centering on the immediate. I was forced off the road, dispatch. Westbound on Highway 9, about 5 miles past the Route 17 intersection. 2 police cruisers are at the bottom of a ravine. It's a mess. 2 cruisers down? Big Rig, confirm. What transpired? Urgency tightened the dispatcher's tone. They were pursuing me. Complicated story. Listen, there's more. There was an explosion. A car bomb. I fear someone's dead. Each word was a stone in his gut. He hated speaking the possibility aloud. Silence descended, punctuated by static crackle and the Big Rig's throaty rumble. Then, the dispatcher, her voice sharpened to a keen edge, cut back in. Big Rig, stay calm. Emergency services are en route. Can you confirm the explosion? Report any casualties. Explosion confirmed. I can't determine casualties. It was catastrophic. He scrubbed his face, feeling the grime and grit, the tangible residue of the night's ordeal. Dispatch, this was no accident. This was intentional. There were people, who attempted to murder me. They're still out there. Vehicle description, Big Rig? Direction of flight? Jake forced a mental rewind, recalling the details amid the chaos. Dark sedan, dispatch. Possibly a Ford, possibly a Chevy. Newer model. Darkened windows. Couldn't catch the plate, damn it. They headed east on Highway 9, toward the city proper. Any distinguishing marks, Big Rig? Anything at all? She pressed, the urgency palpable. Yeah, something. A decal on the rear window. Small square. I think it was a skull. A white skull against a black field. Maybe with crossed wrenches beneath? Something to that effect. He groped for the memory, the image elusive. And the driver. Lanky build, tall. Dark hair, combed back sleek. He wore a leather jacket. Black hide. Understood, big rig. Skull decal, black leather jacket. Eastbound on Highway 9. All points bulletin issued. Hold your position, assistance is forthcoming. Jake's grip tightened on the microphone. Negative, dispatch. I cannot remain here. I must go. I have to locate them. Big rig, do you copy? I repeat, secure your position. You are a person of interest in an active investigation. The dispatcher's tone brooked no argument. I copy, dispatch. But I'm compelled to act. He knew the folly of defiance, but couldn't stand pat. The specter of Sarah, the chance she was gone, fueled his resolve. He needed answers. Justice demanded retribution. He released the transmit button. The radio crackled, the dispatcher's increasingly frantic pleas dissolving into static as he wrenched the big rig off the highway onto a forgotten dirt track, veering southward, away from the city's glow, beyond the reach of the rising siren song. He walked a tightrope, justice giving way to a thirst for vengeance. An outlaw, now, hunted by the very system he once trusted, propelled by desperation. Alone, yes, but far from defenseless. He had the big rig, an intimate knowledge of these hidden routes, and a white-hot need to protect the embers of his life. He thundered down the dirt track, the dying sun bleeding across the horizon in streaks of fiery orange and somber purple. The vista's beauty went unseen, swallowed by the encroaching darkness that had colonized his soul. He was not just a trucker anymore. Something hardened, sharpened, took root within him. He was a force to be reckoned with. He braked on the track's shoulder, killing the engine. A hush fell, broken only by the chirping chorus of crickets and the mournful cry of a distant coyote. He needed strategy, a clear course of action. Blind pursuit was futile. Information was key, allies essential. He needed to be several moves ahead. He retrieved his cell, a vestige of a life that now felt like a fading dream. He scrolled through his contacts, seeking a lifeline, a name he could trust in the gathering storm. His finger froze over a name, Earl. An old comrade, a brother of the road, intimately acquainted with the underbelly. Earl wouldn't pry, he'd simply deliver. He hesitated, then tapped the call button. The rings amplified the anxiety eating at him. He didn't relish dragging anyone into this quagmire, but he had no choice. He needed assistance. Yeah? A gravelly voice answered. Earl, it's Jake. Jake? Hell, haven't heard from your hide in ages. What brings you calling? Jake inhaled deeply. I need a boon, Earl. A significant one. Depends, Jake. What variety? Information. I need to locate certain individuals. Immediately. Earl fell silent. What kind of individuals, Jake? And why come to me? They harmed someone dear to me, Earl. Grievously. They operate a dark sedan, later model. Possibly sporting a skull sticker on the rear window. They're traveling east toward the city. I require their identities, their destination. Earl sighed heavily. Sounds like a hornet's nest, Jake. The kind I usually sidestep. I know, Earl. But I wouldn't impose if it wasn't critical. I'm up against it. Another pause. Jake could practically hear Earl calculating the risks. At last he spoke. Fine, Jake. I'll see what I can unearth. But this ain't charity. Data of that caliber carries a premium. Name your price, Jake stated, his voice unwavering. I'll meet it. We'll discuss that later, Earl countered. Just grant me some time. I'll be in touch once I have something substantial. How long? Jake insisted. However long it takes, Earl replied. Just sit tight and await my call. And Jake, tread carefully out there. The line disconnected. Jake gazed at the phone, a spark of hope warring with a profound sense of foreboding. He had cast the die, but the outcome remained shrouded. He'd summoned reinforcements, yet remained alone in the encroaching night, confronting an unknown adversary. He cranked the engine and rejoined the dirt track, plunging deeper into the darkness. The hunt had commenced. Scene of the crime. Distant sirens clawed at the smoky air, the rising pitch a jagged counterpoint to the crackling flames. Jake stood back from the sedan's ruined husk, waves of heat prickling his skin. Numbness had set in as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving a lingering hollowness. Red and blue strobes pulsed across the scene, painting an ugly mural of chaos on the otherwise still highway. A patrol car screeched to a stop, spitting gravel. A fresh-faced officer, barely out of his teens, scrambled out, hand instinctively hovering near his sidearm. The scene hit him hard, the inferno that had been a car, the scattered wreckage, and Jake, a solitary figure amidst the devastation. "Sir, are you all right? Please, step away from the vehicle." The officer's voice, still carrying a trace of youthful timbre, was tight with apprehension. Jake raised his hands slowly, his movements wooden. "I'm fine. Just shocked." More responders arrived, another patrol car, an ambulance, and finally, a dark SUV with darkly tinted windows. A woman emerged, an air of command radiating from her tailored blazer and severe dark bun. Detective Isabella Reynolds. Reynolds took in the scene with a seasoned gaze, her eyes sharp and calculating. Ignoring Jake for the moment, she zeroed in on the burning wreckage. "Miller, secure the perimeter. Keep the vultures at bay." The order was clipped, precise. The young officer straightened. "Ambulance, any chance of survivors?" "Negative, detective," the paramedic replied, his tone flat. "Total loss. Nothing we can do." Reynolds' jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. She turned towards Jake, her expression carefully neutral. "You made the call?" Jake nodded, his voice rough. "Yeah. I saw it all. I'm Detective Reynolds," she stated, her voice smooth but edged with steel. "I need you to recount everything you witnessed from start to finish. Leave nothing out." She indicated a patrol car. "We'll talk in there. Less noise." The interior of the patrol car carried the ghosts of stale coffee and disinfectant. Reynolds settled behind the wheel, notepad ready, pen poised. Jake sat beside her, the vinyl cold and unyielding against his back. He recounted the evening's events, from the disabled sedan and its seemingly desperate driver, to the sudden ambush and the ensuing explosion. He kept Earl and his plans buried. "They ran me off the road," Jake said, his voice a low rumble. "Tried to finish me. I barely escaped." Reynolds scribbled, her face impassive. "Did you recognize any of the perpetrators? Anything distinct?" Jake hesitated. "The skull decal. That had to stay hidden." "No. They were masked? It all happened too quickly." "The driver of the sedan, did you get a clear view?" "Yeah," Jake said, Sarah's face flashing in his mind, her fear a palpable thing. "Young woman. Brown hair, I think. Difficult to be certain in the dark." Reynolds paused, her eyes locking onto Jake's. "You seem reluctant, Mr. Rigger. Holding something back, perhaps?" Jake met her gaze, his own unwavering. "I'm telling you everything, detective." Reynolds held his stare for a beat longer. "This vehicle," she said, gesturing towards the raging fire outside. "Registered to a Sarah Jenkins, address in Harmony Creek. Does that name mean anything to you?" A cold fist clenched in Jake's gut. Sarah. So that was her name. He fought to keep his voice steady. "No. Never heard of her." Reynolds persisted, her questions probing, searching for gaps. Jake answered as circumspectly as possible, carefully omitting anything that betrayed his own agenda. He felt her suspicion, the way she was measuring him, trying to decipher his motives. Sheriff Brody lumbered over, his face a roadmap of weariness. A large man with a salt and pepper mustache and eyes that held too many stories. His movements were heavy and deliberate. "Izzy," he said, addressing Reynolds. "What's the story? Car bombing, Sheriff, Reynolds replied, stepping out of the car. Witness claims he was forced off the road by the same vehicle. Driver's ID'd as Sarah Jenkins. Brody grunted. Jenkins. Doesn't ring any bells. Any priors? In progress, Reynolds replied. But something doesn't feel right. The witness, Rigger, isn't giving us the whole truth. Brody shot a glance at Jake, his expression hardening. Rigger, huh? Runs that trucking outfit, right? Always struck me as a stand-up guy. Appearances can mislead, Sheriff, Reynolds said, her eyes never leaving Jake. Run a full background check on Mr. Rigger. Everything. And put a discreet tail on him. Brody sighed heavily. You think he's involved? I think he knows more than he's admitting, Reynolds said. And I intend to find out what. She turned back to Jake. Mr. Rigger, you're free to go. But you are to remain in town. And should you recall anything further, no matter how insignificant, you will contact me immediately. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. He stepped out of the vehicle, the cool night air a welcome balm. He watched as Reynolds and Brody conferred, their voices low and intense. He knew he was a suspect, that he was under surveillance. But that couldn't deter him. He had a debt to collect. As Jake walked towards his rig, Officer Miller approached, his face earnest. Mr. Rigger, he said, just wanted to say, I'm glad you're okay. That was a close one. Jake offered the young officer a curt nod, his expression softening slightly. Thanks, kid. I appreciate it. Detective Reynolds is really good. Miller continued, lowering his voice. She doesn't miss a thing. You should be honest with her, sir. It'll be better for you in the long run. Jake simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Miller's advice was sound, but trust in the law was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not yet. He had to find Sarah first. He needed to understand the motivation behind her betrayal. Trust, he was learning, was a fragile thing, easily shattered. He climbed into his rig, the guttural growl of the engine a comforting sound in the discordant night. He pulled onto the highway, leaving the scene of the crime behind, driven by a thirst for vengeance and a desperate flicker of hope for answers. The flashing lights diminished in his rearview mirror, but the memory of the burning car, and the look in Sarah's eyes, would be etched in his memory. The chase begins. The black sedan snapped its tail, scattering grit as Marcus Thorne strong-armed it onto the I-40 on-ramp. Punch it, Sarah! Punch it! He bellowed, his grip of ice on the steering wheel. Beside him, Sarah Jenkins, ashen and shivering, obeyed, burying the pedal. The engine howled its displeasure, yet the car lunged ahead, bullying its way into the thinning twilight traffic. The rising shriek of sirens amplified behind them, an insistent, piercing cry. Detective Reynolds' Crown Vic, ablaze with flashing lights, rapidly ate up the space. Davy Miller, clinging to the dash, felt his breath snag in his throat. This was it. Baptism by fire. Academy simulations faded into insignificance compared to the raw, surging adrenaline now. Hold the line, Miller, Reynolds commanded, her voice a study in composure despite the needle's relentless climb. Run the plates, confirm we've got our players. Davy scrambled for the radio, his fingers thick and unwieldy. Dispatch, Unit 42 in pursuit, black sedan, plates, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. 729, need verification, stat. He swallowed, his mouth suddenly a desert. Confirmed 42. The dispatcher's voice buzzed back. Plates match vehicle linked to the Jenkins homicide. Proceed with extreme caution. Subjects are considered armed and highly dangerous. Asterisk armed and dangerous. Asterisk the phrase hung in the confined space, a leaden weight. Davy cast a glance at Reynolds, her face a granite mask. The lines bracketing her eyes seemed deeper, etched by the weight of the Jenkins case. Up front, the black sedan careened wildly through traffic, sideswiping a semi, narrowly skirting a collision. Thorne was piloting it like a kamikaze pilot. He's going to get someone killed, Davy choked out, his stomach clenching. Not on my watch, Reynolds countered, her gaze laser-locked on their quarry. "Keep your eyes peeled, Miller. Anything that moves." The pursuit ratcheted up a notch. Driven by raw desperation, Marcus carved through impossible gaps. He slashed across lanes, triggering a chorus of outraged horns. Davy, his initial thrill curdling into a growing sense of foreboding, barked out warnings, his voice climbing in register. Blue minivan, merging hot. 18-wheeler, crawling in the slow lane. Construction zone dead ahead. Reynolds, hands glued to the wheel, reacted in a heartbeat, anticipating Thorne's every deranged move. She met his aggression with her own, pushing the Crown Vic to its breaking point, the engine screaming, tires protesting against the asphalt. She remained on their tail, a shadow, a grim promise of reckoning. Inside the speeding sedan, the air vibrated with terror. "They're still glued to us, Sarah! Faster!" Marcus shrieked, pounding the dashboard with a closed fist. Sarah, tears etching paths down her cheeks, clutched the wheel, her knuckles screaming. "I'm trying! This is all your fault, Marcus. You swore it would be easy. You promised no one would get hurt. Just drive!" Marcus snarled, yanking her arm. "You wanted that money, didn't you? Now you get to earn it." She recoiled, her eyes flickering to the rearview mirror, to the unblinking gaze of the approaching cruiser. The enormity of her decisions, the crushing weight of her avarice, slammed into her. She had only craved a way out, a clean slate. Instead, she glimpsed a different kind of clean slate, the sterile walls of a prison cell. The construction zone yawned before them, a dizzying panorama of orange cones, strobing lights, and hulking machinery. Ignoring the flashing warnings, Marcus steered a course straight into the chaos, sending cones flying, missing a startled worker by mere inches. "He just ran a construction worker off the road," Davy blurted, his voice tight with outrage. "He's going to kill someone, Detective!" Reynolds' jaw tightened into a hard line. "He's past the point of no return. Time to end this." She keyed the mic. "All units, suspect vehicle has entered active construction zone, exhibiting extreme disregard for public safety. Requesting authorization to use deadly force if necessary." The answer came swiftly. "Authorization granted, 42. Proceed with extreme caution." Reynolds inhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing to slits. This wasn't the path she wanted, but Thorne had forced her hand. She wrung every last ounce of power from the Crown Victoria, closing the space between them. As the sedan hurtled through the obstacle course, Marcus spied a narrow breach in the concrete barricades, a potential escape route onto a service road. "There! That's our chance!" he screamed, jabbing his finger. Sarah, her thoughts a whirlwind, wrenched the wheel, aiming for the opening. But her judgment faltered. The tires scraped against the barrier with a jarring thud. The sedan bucked violently, sending Marcus sprawling against the door. "Damn you, Sarah! What are you doing?" he roared, his face twisted with fury. Before Sarah could reply, the Crown Victoria slammed into the sedan's rear, the impact sending both vehicles into a violent spin. The sedan ricocheted off the barrier, careening wildly across the construction site before shuddering to a halt against a mountain of concrete pipes. The Crown Victoria, its front end accordioned, ground to a halt a short distance away. Reynolds, every muscle aching, took stock. "Miller, you in one piece?" she asked, her voice taut. Davy, shaken but unharmed, nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." "You?" "Just a little rattled," Reynolds said, releasing her seatbelt. "Let's move. Time to collect our dues." They emerged, weapons drawn, warily advancing on the crumpled sedan. Smoke billowed from the ravaged engine, the air thick with the reek of gasoline and scorched rubber. Marcus, groggy and bleeding from a cut on his forehead, stumbled from the driver's side, his eyes darting wildly, desperation etched on his face. "Stay back," he howled, raising his hands in a feeble gesture of defiance. Sarah remained slumped in the passenger seat, her face buried in her hands, racked with sobs. "Police! Freeze!" Reynolds' voice cut through the air, sharp and uncompromising. "On the ground. Now." Marcus hesitated, his gaze sweeping for an escape, any escape. But there was nowhere left to run. He lowered himself to the ground, his body trembling like a leaf. Reynolds and Davy approached cautiously, securing Marcus with restraints. As they led him away, Davy experienced a heady mix of adrenaline and accomplishment. They had him. The hunt was over. Reynolds approached the passenger side of the car. "Sarah Jenkins, come out of the car with your hands up." Sarah did not respond, her head was still in her hands. "Sarah Jenkins, this is the police, come out of the car." Sarah slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. A tear streaked down her face as she looked at the detective. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Reynolds opened the car door and pulled Sarah out. She put her hands behind her back and Reynolds cuffed her. "You have the right to remain silent." Davy watched Reynolds recite Sarah her rights, her tone professional and detached. He knew, however, that behind that steely exterior, she felt the human tragedy embedded in the case, the ruined lives, the shattered faith. The apprehension, he understood, marked not an ending, but a starting point. Now the genuine work, the hunt for resolution and fairness, commenced. His gaze returned to the wrecked vehicle, fumes rising from the hood, the tire tracks etched into the construction site's dirt. This was a tableau he would likely never forget. Driven to assist? The retreating taillights blurred in Jake's mirror, each flicker a hammer blow against his composure. Keep moving. Vanish. A spectre adrift, he couldn't risk entanglements, not with Lily waiting for him. Yet, Sarah Jenkins' terrified face burned behind his eyelids. That desperate, silent scream before Thorne had manhandled her back into the car. He knew that brand of stark, raw terror. And then there was Miller, the rookie. So green he practically glowed, flung headfirst into a nightmare. Damn it all to hell. Jake growled, pounding the dashboard. Cheap plastic groaned, surrendering to the force. He'd been cornered, outgunned, left for dead. He also knew the bitter taste of inaction. A war raged within him, old burdens pressing hard. His sole purpose was Lily's safety, shielding her from the encroaching shadows. But Sarah, trapped, haunted him. Lily wouldn't condone indifference. She'd expect him to act. He steered the truck onto the shoulder, tires grinding against the loose gravel. He cut the engine, the sudden quiet amplified by the refrigeration unit's steady drone. Eyes closed, he inhaled deeply. One last out. One final chance to evaporate into the anonymity of the interstate. The radio snarled, a voice raw with panic piercing the stillness. Pursuit, reckless speeds, construction zone, civilian traffic endangered. That settled it. Jake's jaw hardened. He twisted the key, the engine exploding into a defiant roar, a mirror of his own resolve. The 18-wheeler surged onto the blacktop, spitting stones. He wouldn't try to overtake them, that was suicide. He simply had to be close enough to interfere, if everything went south. The highway stretched ahead, mostly deserted at this late hour. But in the distance, a frantic light show pulsed, the chaotic dance of pursuit. He hung back, the sheer mass of his rig a warning to any foolhardy driver considering interference. He switched on his brights, flooding the road with an intense, unwavering beam. The radio chatter escalated, painting a vivid tableau of a situation spiraling out of control. Thorne, behind the wheel of the stolen sedan, was threading through traffic like a rabid animal, flouting every rule in the book. Ahead, the construction zone loomed, a labyrinth of concrete barriers, dormant machinery, and narrowed lanes. A death trap waiting to claim its victims. Jake's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He knew this stretch of highway intimately. Blind curves, sudden dips, treacherous shoulders. A trial by fire, even in daylight. Tonight, in a high-speed chase, it was a cataclysm in the making. He registered the swirling cloud of dust first, then the eruption of sparks. The brutal shriek of metal against concrete ripped through the night. Reflexively, he slammed on the brakes, the anti-lock system kicking in with a visceral shudder. The radio fell silent, replaced by a piercing, electronic whine. He coasted to a standstill, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The scene ahead was a grotesque sculpture of mangled metal and pulverized concrete. The sedan was accordioned against a barrier, smoke coiling from the mangled hood. A patrol car lay askew, its front end a ruin. He threw the truck into park, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. He had to act. But how? He was just a witness, an observer. He should remain put and await officialdom. Let the professionals handle it. But he was incapable. He couldn't stand by and observe, not again. He wrestled out his flashlight, a hefty mag light reserved for emergencies, and vaulted from the cab. The air reeked of scorched rubber and spilled gasoline. An oppressive silence descended, broken only by the distant ululation of approaching sirens. Cautiously, he advanced toward the devastation, his flashlight slicing through the gloom. Miller, the rookie, stumbled around, dazed but seemingly intact. He was struggling to reach the wrecked sedan, stymied by the twisted metal. "Stay back," Jake shouted, his voice ragged. "It could blow." Miller turned, his face ashen and smeared with grime. Recognition flickered in his eyes. You shouldn't be here," he stammered. "Irrelevant," Jake said, his tone curt. "Injuries?" Miller shook his head, gesturing toward the other officer, Reynolds, who lay prone near the crippled cruiser, conscious but visibly injured. Jake moved with practiced efficiency, assessing Reynolds, who clutched his arm, a crimson stain blooming on his sleeve. He needed immediate medical intervention. He refocused on the sedan. Sarah was slumped in the driver's seat, head lolling. Thorne was nowhere in sight. Without hesitation, he retrieved his crowbar, a tool typically employed for securing cargo, and approached the wreckage. He wedged the crowbar into the mangled doorframe, leveraging it with all his might. Metal screeched in protest before finally yielding. He reached inside, locating Sarah's pulse. Faint but present. Gently, he extracted her from the wreckage, carrying her to safety, away from the potential inferno. He surveyed the scene, his gaze locking on Miller, who was staring in stunned disbelief. "He's gone," Miller breathed, his voice barely audible. "Thorne, he escaped." Jake's jaw clenched. He'd anticipated this. Thorne was vermin, a survivor at any cost. He scanned the surrounding darkness. The construction zone offered 1,000 hiding places. He could be anywhere. Jake's hand instinctively drifted to the small of his back, where he concealed his own sidearm, a weapon he shunned but never relinquished. The chase was far from finished. And somehow, he understood he was now deeply embroiled. He had assisted, and now he was driven. Cat and mouse. The dilapidated sedan, with Thorne at the helm and Sarah clinging to the passenger seat, fish-tailed precariously across the asphalt, a wounded animal desperately trying to outrun its pursuers. The crimson and azure blaze of the patrol cars painted the rearview mirror in strokes of impending doom. Thorne bellowed, pounding the cracked dashboard. "They're glued to our tail, aren't they?" Sarah winced. "Just drive, Thorne. Get us away." Her voice, a tightrope stretched taut, threatened to snap. The air inside reeked of ozone anxiety and the acrid bite of scorched rubber. Officer Miller, behind the wheel of the lead cruiser, wrestled with the controls, his grip of ice on the steering wheel. "He's trying to sideswipe us, Detective." He fought to maintain control as Thorne executed another evasive maneuver, the sedan's rear panel glancing off their front fender in a jarring shudder. Reynolds, in the passenger seat, braced herself against the sudden jolt. "Stay on them, Miller. Don't let them gain ground. I want backup, a roadblock, now." Her tone, a study in composure, stood in stark contrast to the bedlam unfolding, but her gaze, locked on the fleeing vehicle, blazed with unwavering resolve. Further ahead, Jake, still grappling with the ramifications of Thorne's escape and Sarah's brush with death, saw the approaching strobe lights eating up the distance. The highway had become a theater of chaos. He checked his rearview, a knot tightening in his stomach. The sedan was all over the road, a cornered coyote snapping at the heels of the pursuing law enforcement. A curse rumbled from his throat. He'd sworn he was done. Finished with the mayhem, the endless flight. But the vision of Sarah, trapped within that mangled wreck, wouldn't dissipate. Now Thorn, the architect of her suffering, was bearing down on him. Thorn, spotting the approaching semi, recognized the rig instantly. "It's him. The trucker." He howled at Sarah, his voice a raw, manic edge. "He's going to try and cut us off." He wrenched the steering wheel, aiming the sedan directly at Jake's 18-wheeler. The engine shrieked in agony, pushed to its absolute breaking point. Sarah gasped, her fingers digging into the dashboard. "Thorn, no! You'll kill us!" "Shut it!" Thorn snarled, his features twisted into a mask of fury. "He deserves this." He stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. He steeled himself, his hands tightening on the controls. He saw the rabid glint in Thorn's eyes, the crazed desperation that bordered on lunacy. The sedan hurtled toward him, a steel projectile charged with murderous intent. He dropped a gear, the truck protesting with a groan, and veered hard to starboard, narrowly escaping a catastrophic head-on. The sedan screamed past, missing his front bumper by a hair's breadth. The impact sent a shudder along the truck's frame. The horn blared, a long, angry bellow that echoed across the interstate. In the back of the second cruiser, Davy Miller exhaled in relief. That was a close one. Reynolds, however, remained impassive. "They're unraveling," she said, her voice laced with steel. That was no longer just evasion, that was attempted assault. "We need to neutralize them, now." Thorn, cursing his missed opportunity, fought to regain control of the swerving sedan. The near miss had rattled him, but it had also ignited his rage. He shot a look at Sarah, whose face was a canvas of pallor and tears. "This is all you're doing," he spat, his words dripping with venom. "If you hadn't botched the plan, we wouldn't be in this damn mess." Sarah recoiled, shrinking into herself. I didn't intend for any of this," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. The enormity of her actions, the weight of the consequences, threatened to suffocate her. The promised deliverance had curdled into a waking nightmare of flashing lights and shrieking rubber. Jake watched in his rearview as the police cruisers gained ground once more. He knew he couldn't remain on the sidelines. Thorn was a rogue element, a threat to anyone in his path. And Sarah, he couldn't let anything befall her, even if it meant placing himself in the line of fire. He flicked on his CB radio, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "This is Big Rig," he announced, his voice crackling over the airwaves. "To any units in pursuit, be advised, the suspect vehicle is operating with extreme recklessness. They just tried to force me off the road. Exercise extreme caution." Reynolds, recognizing Jake's voice, seized the microphone from Miller. "Big Rig, this is Detective Reynolds. We acknowledge your warning. Can you offer any additional support?" Jake hesitated. He was a fugitive, hunted by the very individuals he was attempting to aid. But he couldn't idly stand by as Thorn descended further into madness. "I'm staying in proximity," he said, his tone resolute. "I will render assistance where possible." Reynolds nodded, her gaze sharp. "Understood, Big Rig. But bear in mind, your well-being remains paramount. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." As the pursuit pressed on, Thorn, propelled by desperation and fury, executed another treacherous maneuver, swerving violently across 3 lanes of traffic. A semi-trailer, unaware of the unfolding drama, slammed on its brakes, its air horn shattering the night. The sedan averted a collision by mere inches, but the near miss sent it into a violent spin. The sedan careened erratically, fishtailing wildly across the highway before impacting the median barrier with a sickening metallic shriek. The airbags detonated, engulfing the cabin in a choking cloud of white powder. Thorn and Sarah were propelled forward, their heads snapping violently against the headrests. Behind them, the patrol cars screeched to a halt, leaving streaks of burnt rubber on the asphalt. Miller leaped from the lead vehicle, weapon drawn. "Freeze! Police! Do not move!" Reynolds, her expression grim, approached the ruined sedan with caution. She could see Thorn slumped over the steering wheel, his eyes unfocused. Sarah was conscious but visibly traumatized, her face ashen and streaked with tears. "Extract them from the vehicle," Reynolds commanded, her voice sharp. Miller, summon an ambulance. Now. As the officers worked to extricate Thorne and Sarah from the wreckage, Reynolds turned her attention toward the approaching semi-truck. Jake was pulling over to the shoulder, his features etched with concern. Reynolds knew the ordeal wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Thorne was in custody, but the true puppet master, the one who had masterminded the entire operation, was still at large. She had a premonition that Jake, with his haunted gaze and unwavering resolve, was destined to be caught in the thick of it. End of the road. The scream of the engine was a constant, grating whine in Thorne's ears, amplifying his own rising panic. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were bone-white. Damn her. Damn her for getting us into this. He punctuated each word with a vicious yank on the wheel, the sedan swerving dangerously close to the guardrail. Sarah, slumped in the passenger seat, didn't react. Her face was pale, streaked with tears and grime. The adrenaline that had fueled her earlier was gone, replaced by a dull, heavy dread. Ahead, a glint of metal flashed under the highway lights. Thorne squinted, his heart hammering against his ribs. He recognized it instantly, the cold, predatory gleam of spike strips. Spikes. He roared, his voice cracking. Sarah finally stirred, her eyes widening in terror. What do we do? What do you think we do, idiot? We avoid them. Thorne wrestled with the wheel, adrenaline flooding his system. He stomped on the accelerator, the engine screaming in protest as the car lurched forward. He aimed for the narrow gap between the deployed strips and the concrete barrier. In the patrol car, Davy Miller watched with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. This was his first real chase. He gripped the microphone tightly, his knuckles white. They're approaching the spikes, Detective Reynolds. Looks like they're trying to avoid them. Izzy Reynolds, her jaw tight, gripped the steering wheel. Don't underestimate them, Miller. They're desperate. Be ready for anything. She'd seen desperation turn ordinary people into unpredictable weapons. She'd seen it too many times. Thorne's maneuver was reckless, bordering on suicidal. He swerved violently at the last possible second, narrowly missing the first set of spikes. The tires screeched in protest, the car momentarily losing traction. He overcorrected, the sedan fishtailing wildly. Hold on, he yelled, though Sarah was beyond any response. The back end of the car swung out, slamming against the concrete barrier with a sickening crunch. Metal shrieked, sparks showering the night. Thorne fought to regain control, but it was too late. The car was already spinning, a chaotic blur of headlights and taillights. He saw the bridge embankment looming ahead, a dark, unyielding wall of earth and concrete. He braced himself, a guttural yell escaping his lips. The impact was deafening, a violent explosion of metal and glass. The car crumpled like an accordion, the front end collapsing inward. The airbags deployed with a concussive force, momentarily blinding Thorne. Silence descended, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hissing of escaping fluids and the faint crackle of the car's electrical system. Thorne groaned, his head swimming, his body a symphony of aches and pains. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. Sarah was slumped against the passenger side airbag, her face pale and still. A trickle of blood ran from a cut on her forehead. Behind them, sirens wailed, growing louder with each passing second. Reynolds to dispatch, suspects have crashed. Requesting ambulance and backup. Izzy Reynolds spoke into her radio, her voice calm and professional, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding her. She brought the cruiser to a controlled stop a safe distance from the wreckage, careful not to impede the approaching emergency vehicles. Davy Miller, still buzzing with adrenaline, was already out of the car, drawing his weapon. He approached the wreckage cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions, fear, excitement, and a deep sense of responsibility. Izzy followed close behind, her eyes scanning the scene. She noted the twisted metal, the shattered glass, the telltale signs of a violent collision. She saw the spike strips, lying uselessly on the road, their intended purpose thwarted by Thorne's desperate maneuver. Miller, cover me, she ordered, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Let's see what we've got." Davy nodded, his face pale but determined. He took a deep breath and moved to flank the vehicle, his gun trained on the driver's side door. Izzy approached the passenger side, her hand resting on her holster. She peered through the shattered window, her eyes meeting Sarah's vacant stare. She saw the blood, the bruises, the sheer terror etched on the young woman's face. "Sarah, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Are you hurt?" Sarah blinked, her eyes slowly focusing. She winced in pain, her hand instinctively going to the cut on her forehead. I think so," she mumbled, her voice weak and shaky. "Just stay still," Izzy said. "Help is on the way." She turned her attention to Thorn, who was still slumped behind the wheel, groaning softly. His eyes were closed, his face contorted in pain. "Thorn, can you hear me?" Izzy asked, her voice firm. "Open your eyes." Thorn slowly opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused. He blinked, trying to clear his head. He saw Izzy's face, her expression grim and determined. "You're under arrest, Thorn," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Get your hands where I can see them." Thorn didn't respond. He just stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and defiance. Davy Miller, still covering the driver's side, saw movement in his peripheral vision. He tensed, his finger tightening on the trigger. He saw a figure emerging from the shadows, walking slowly towards the wreckage. It was the trucker, the man who had initially reported the incident. He was walking calmly, his hands raised in the air. "Hold it right there," Davy yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "Don't move." The trucker stopped, his face impassive. He looked at Davy, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I just wanted to see if everyone was okay," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Izzy Reynolds turned, her eyes locking on the trucker. She felt a surge of unease, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. There was something about this man, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Stay back," she ordered, her voice cold. "This is a crime scene." The trucker hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. He took a step back, his eyes still fixed on Izzy. "Just trying to help," he said, his voice barely audible. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows. Izzy watched him go, her mind racing. She knew she should focus on the immediate situation, the injured suspects, the wrecked car, the arriving emergency vehicles. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the trucker was somehow connected to all of this, that he was more than just a good Samaritan who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. She made a mental note to run his plates, to find out who he was and what he was doing out here. She had a feeling this wasn't the last she'd see of him. The sirens grew louder, the flashing lights painting the scene in a chaotic swirl of red and blue. The first ambulance arrived, the paramedics rushing towards the wreckage. Izzy Reynolds took a deep breath, steeling herself. The cleanup was just beginning. And something told her this was far from over. Aftermath. The air hung thick with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. Twisted metal groaned as the jaws of life gnawed at the wreckage of Thorn's car. Red and blue strobes pulsed, painting the scene in a dizzying, urgent light. Paramedics swarmed, their voices clipped and professional amidst the chaos. Officer Miller, looking paler than usual, directed traffic with jerky movements, waving vehicles past the shoulder with a fluorescent baton. Detective Reynolds, her face grim, knelt beside the open rear door of an ambulance, watching as a paramedic tightened a bandage on Sarah's arm. Sarah hissed in pain, her eyes darting around, wild and unfocused. Thorn, strapped to a backboard, was being loaded into a separate ambulance. He was unconscious, a nasty gash bleeding freely above his left eye. Jake leaned against the hood of his rig, the chrome reflecting the pandemonium. He felt a dull ache blossoming in his ribs, a souvenir from the near miss with the spike strips. The taste of adrenaline still lingered on his tongue, metallic and bitter. He watched as Reynolds approached, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Rigger," she said, her voice surprisingly soft amidst the din. "I need to ask you a few questions, but first I want to thank you." You prevented what could have been a much worse situation. Jake grunted, pushing himself upright. Just did what I had to. Reynolds nodded, her eyes scanning the scene. You put yourself in harm's way. We appreciate that. She gestured towards Sarah. Bellwether and Thorne will be charged, of course. Attempted robbery, assault, reckless endangerment, the list goes on. Good, Jake said, his voice flat. He watched as Sarah was helped into the ambulance, her face a mask of sullen anger. He couldn't shake the image of her, all smiles and feigned distress, moments before the robbery. The fragility of trust. It was a lesson he seemed destined to keep relearning. Bellwether claims they were desperate. Reynolds continued, her voice thoughtful. Said they needed money? Jake scoffed. Everyone's got a sob story. Doesn't excuse trying to blow me to kingdom come. Reynolds' gaze sharpened. About that, the car bomb. Any idea why they targeted you specifically? Jake hesitated. He didn't want to drag Sarah into this, not yet. No idea. Wrong place, wrong time, I guess. Reynolds studied him, her eyes unwavering. You're sure about that, Mr. Rigger? Because I'm having a hard time believing this was just a random act. Jake met her gaze, his expression impassive. That's all I got, detective. Reynolds sighed, running a hand through her short, dark hair. All right. For now. But I'll be in touch. She turned to Officer Miller. Davy, get a statement from Mr. Rigger. Then get that car towed to the impound lot. I want forensics to go over it inch by inch. Miller, visibly relieved to have a task, hurried towards Jake, notepad in hand. Reynolds turned back to the ambulances, her brow furrowed. Sheriff Brody approached, his face etched with concern. Izzy, what have we got? He asked, his voice low. A mess, Sheriff. Reynolds replied. A damn mess. And I have a feeling it's about to get a whole lot messier. She pointed towards Jake. I don't buy his story. He's holding something back. Brody followed her gaze. He seems like a decent guy. A bit rough around the edges, but rough edges can hide a lot, Sheriff. Reynolds said, her voice tight. And something about this whole situation stinks. She paused, her eyes narrowing. Did you notice the trucker who was at the scene before we arrived? He disappeared before we could get a statement. Brody frowned. A trucker? No, I didn't see anyone. He was there. Reynolds insisted. I saw him. Just another rig, plain as day. But he was gone when I turned back. Brody stroked his chin thoughtfully. Could be just a good Samaritan, passing through. Maybe. Reynolds conceded. But I want his plate number. Run it. See who he is, where he's from. I want to know everything about him. Meanwhile, Officer Miller was taking Jake's statement, his pen scratching furiously across the notepad. He stammered slightly, his enthusiasm battling with his nervousness. So, Mr. Rigger, you said you were just driving along when you saw Ms. Bellwether pulled over? That's right, Jake said, keeping his answers short and to the point. And she flagged you down, asking for help? Yep. And then, they pulled a gun on you? You read the report, kid, Jake said, his patience wearing thin. Miller blushed. Right. Sorry. Just trying to get all the details. He paused, chewing on his lip. You were very brave, Mr. Rigger. Putting yourself in danger like that. Jake shrugged. Someone had to do something. As Miller continued to take his statement, Jake's mind drifted. He replayed the events of the evening, searching for something he might have missed. Sarah's performance had been convincing, almost too convincing. And Thorne. Thorne was just a brute, easily led. But who was leading him? Who had put them up to this? And why him? The questions swirled in his head, unanswered. He glanced towards the ambulances, now pulling away from the scene, sirens wailing. Sarah was gone, at least for now. But he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He felt a familiar unease settling in his gut, a sense of impending doom. He had a feeling that the events of this night were just the beginning of something much bigger, something much more dangerous. Miller finally finished taking the statement, his face flushed with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Rigger. We appreciate your cooperation." Jake nodded curtly, pushing himself away from the hood of his truck. "Yeah, well, I appreciate you catching the guys who tried to kill me." He climbed into the cab of his rig, the familiar scent of oil and leather a small comfort. He started the engine, the rumble a low growl beneath the chaos. He glanced in his rearview mirror, watching as the police cars began to disperse, their flashing lights fading into the distance. He pulled onto the highway, heading north, leaving the wreckage and the questions behind. But he knew deep down that he couldn't outrun them. They would follow him, like a shadow. And he had a feeling they wouldn't be going away anytime soon. Homeward bound. The precinct's harsh lighting was a jarring contrast to the inferno Jake had escaped mere hours ago. He squirmed in the rigid chair, the cheap plastic a sticky presence against his sweat-soaked shirt. Across the scarred table, Detective Reynolds mirrored his exhaustion, her face a road map of sleepless nights. A thick file lay open between them. "So, Mr. Rigger," she began, her voice a gravelly murmur, "you claim to have simply stumbled upon a woman in need?" Jake scrubbed at his bristly chin. The night's chaos assaulted his memory, explosions, gunfire, the glitter of shattered glass. "That's the truth." She waved me down, said her engine was cooked. "I haul freight, detective, lending a hand is part of the gig." Reynolds' gaze sharpened, her eyes, like polished obsidian, fixed on his. "And you just happen to be armed and intimately acquainted with weaponry?" "I'm a legal gun owner," Jake retorted, a hard edge creeping into his voice. "Picked up a few things during my time." He left the specifics unspoken. Some wounds were too raw to display for public consumption. "Your time," she echoed, scribbling in her file. "Right. And this?" "Thorn. Ever laid eyes on him before?" Jake's hesitation was a beat too long. Thorn. The name left a bitter taste. "Never seen him in my life." He held her gaze, willing her to accept his words. Not a complete lie, just a careful omission. He couldn't risk the truth. Reynolds scrutinized him, the silence punctuated only by the relentless hum of the overhead lights. Finally, she sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. "Mr. Rigger, let's be frank. This whole scenario reeks. You were the target. That car bomb wasn't some random act of destruction. Someone wants you buried." Jake stared back, unflinching. "Maybe they mistook me for someone else." A dry, mirthless chuckle escaped her. "Unlikely. You're not easily forgotten, Mr. Rigger. A trucker with baggage, perhaps? Someone who's made enemies." He remained silent. "Look," Reynolds relented, her tone softening slightly. "I can hold you. Your actions were self-defense, and you probably saved lives tonight. But understand this, whatever ignited this firestorm isn't extinguished. Tread carefully." She slammed the file shut. "You're clear to leave." Jake rose, his joints creaking a protest against the prolonged stillness. "Thanks, detective. One more thing, Rigger." Reynolds also stood, her expression earnest. "If any detail surfaces, any flicker of recognition, you contact me. This extends beyond your personal safety." He nodded grimly. He knew she spoke the truth. The scope of this was far larger than him, but the full extent was still shrouded in fog. The first blush of dawn kissed the eastern sky as Jake slid back into the cab of his rig. The air was cool and clean, a stark improvement over the stale atmosphere of the station. He ignited the engine, the rumble a welcome, familiar comfort. Merging onto the highway, he watched the receding city lights shrink in his rearview mirror. The night's turmoil clung to him like grime. Sarah. Thorn. The explosive device. Questions battered his mind, swirling like desert winds concealing the horizon. He remembered Reynolds' warning. She was right. This was merely the overture. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white. He had a daughter who depended on him and a life he was determined to reclaim. He refused to let these shadows steal it. The sunrise intensified, painting the clouds in bold strokes of orange and gold. Jake steered eastward, the sun rising behind him, banishing the darkness. He conjured Martha's image, her radiant smile, the delicate lines around her eyes when she was amused. That vision fueled him, a guiding beacon. He considered the fragility of existence, how easily it could be extinguished, like a flame sputtering in a gale. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, ensnared in a desperate situation, making choices that would irrevocably alter her journey. He wondered if she harbored any remorse, any regret for the maelstrom she had unleashed. Unlikely. As the miles dissolved beneath his wheels, Jake scanned the radio channels. He paused on a local news broadcast, catching the end of a report. Authorities are celebrating a truck driver as a hero for averting an attempted robbery and preventing a car bombing last night. Law enforcement states that the swift actions of Jake Big Rig Rigger saved numerous lives. Jake scowled and killed the sound. Hero. He was no hero. He was simply a man struggling to shield himself and those he cherished. But the bulletin confirmed his worst anxieties. He was now exposed. His face, his identity, plastered across the airwaves. He slammed on the accelerator, the rig surging ahead. He had to reach Martha. He needed to ensure her well-being. He needed to uncover the masterminds behind this and their motives. The miles evaporated, each one drawing him closer to her. He fantasized about pulling into the driveway, seeing her race out to greet him, her arms outstretched. He yearned for the normalcy of their shared life, the tranquil evenings spent reading, the comfortable silence during meals. But he recognized that serenity was now a distant memory. The landscape had shifted. He had been transformed. He was now a marked man, a target entangled in a perilous game with shadowy adversaries. He reached for his phone, pausing before dialing Martha's number. It rang 3 times before diverting to voicemail. A knot of apprehension twisted in his gut. "Hey, sunshine, it's me," he said, his voice raspy. "Just wanted to let you know I'm on my way. Should be there by lunchtime. Love you?" He disconnected, his brow creased with worry. She typically answered. He dismissed the concern. She was likely occupied. He continued onward, the sun ascending higher, scorching away the remnants of the night. He was bound for home, but the road ahead was fraught with peril. He understood that the threat was far from over. It was only the beginning. The cost of the hero title he unwillingly earned was now to be thrust into the spotlight, and he had to get to Martha to ensure his daughter's safety, the only thing that mattered to him.